underestimating the extent of premeditation. You only have to read the 8 volumes of Austro-Hungarian documents to know damn well that the Austrians have been planning this for at least a year. And they were waiting for some kind of excuse, which the assassination of the Archduke at Sarajevo gave them. The big question isn't that. I mean, that's there in the documents. You can't. The Austrian documents, you see, are far better than the German ones, even about German policy and intentions, for the very good reason that the German documents were all censored, filleted, because they were part of the German effort to disclaim responsibility for the war. This is all linked to Warfield and Versailles and everything. But the Austrians report word for word in glowing detail exactly what the Germans are saying to them, and it's completely damning. But the truly interesting issue is, in 1913 and 1912, Berlin holds Vienna back, and Berlin really means the German Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollwegg. Why does he reverse himself in the summer of 1914? I mean, it's a terrifying thing to say, but in the end, European civilization collapses and Europe goes to war, and not more than about 7 or 8 human beings, all of them male, matter. And actually, one of them matters more than the other 7 put together. It's Bethmann-Hollwegg. Because the Kaiser does nothing without asking him in 14, and would have backed out at the last if he could. The Chief of the General Staff, who's the only other person who matters in Berlin, says, go now, we'll win, not later, we won't. But he said that in 12 and 13 and was ignored. It's Bethmann-Hollwegg who said, wait, it would be absurd to go now in 12 or 13, who shifts. And that is the decisive factor. You know, it is frightening that you're talking, I mean, literally, World War, and you're talking about 3-4 people. There are obviously lots of factors, but I knew his granddaughter pretty well because she was a great buddy of my aunt at Christie's, which is the sort of last refuge of the Almanach in Europe, the Yorkshire House, in other words, in London. And she always said Grandpa was depressed because Grandma just died. Now that might sound a bit of a sort of, as you might say, limp explanation for the collapse of European civilization. Not quite as stupid as it sounds. Because these decisions in foreign policy always have been, are, and always will be made by tiny groups of people. And once you're dealing with tiny groups of people, both the dynamics within them and the individual biography really matters. It's crucial in Vienna that Franz Ferdinand is dead, because he is the person who's saying no war. There it's a group of 5 people, and he's the key man saying no war. He is assassinated, which both takes him out of the way and allows the others an extra. In Berlin, it's 3 people. And I think, Bethmann-Hollwegg makes his decision by asking himself 3 questions, or at least providing the answers to 3 questions. He says a European war is coming virtually for certain, and it's coming within the next 20 years. He's saying now we will win it. 15 years down the line, we will lose it, because Russia will be overwhelmingly powerful. And he's also saying a war is likely to come because we'll have some kind of confrontation with Russia, above all likely about the Straits and Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire, in which the Germans have big interests. And we will either be forced to back down at great cost to our own interests and probably to the destruction of our regime in Germany, or we will be forced to fight and probably lose. So better to go now. Why is he making those pessimistic assumptions? And they are pessimistic. I mean, they're not totally implausible. They might, God knows, be proved to be right. One never know. This is not complete nonsense. But it is deeply pessimistic. Why does a human being come up with deeply pessimistic answers? You can't divide a statesman's personal life from his decision-making. And if you are in a deep sense of gloom because of personal tragedy, he obviously, not just was he deeply fond of his wife, but she was his great emotional support and rock. Sitting at the top of a political system is pretty nightmarish. The German Second Reich was nightmare squared. You had to cope with the Kaiser, who was 2/3 of the way towards being a lunatic on occasion. You had to cope with the German parliament, in which the socialists had a plurality. You had to cope with the Prussian parliament in elites, which is dominated by far more conservative groups. You've got endless newspapers and much of civil society screaming at you that you're a weakling, you're not a true man, you're letting down, etc. It's not easy to hold out against all that. I think just something snapped. You know, and that again, that is, and it'll be the same in Washington or, I mean, my God, in comparison to most of the leaders of contemporary great powers, Bethmann-Hollwegg was a decent, humane, honourable, human-loving individual. You know, he had some sense of conscience and some sense of responsibility to something other than himself. You wouldn't find that in Washington at the moment. You might conceivably in Moscow or Beijing, you know.